Meeting is called to order. The Attleboro School Committee, please rise and join the school committee in the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This meeting is being electronically recorded. This is a meeting of the Attleboro School Committee. These agenda items could probably accurately be described as leftover items. We have met a substantial number of times over the past couple of months. We usually do take more breaks than we have, but between superintendent selection and strategic planning and budget crisis and a variety of other matters, collective bargaining among them, we've had a very full agenda, and I appreciate the flexibility and cooperation of the members of the school committee and the administration for being able to help us work expeditiously through tonight's agenda and the agendas over the past several weeks. So I am going to move around a little in the agenda. If anyone has any concerns or loses their place or would like us to slow down, just let me know. I want to start with a motion to approve the consent agenda in its entirety as posted in the school committee agenda of July 21st, 2015.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Those are all three consent agenda items. Starting at the bottom of the business agenda, I'd like to entertain a motion to appoint Superintendent Kenneth Sheehan to the Board of Directors for the Bi-County Collaborative.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. We did have the contractual agreement for Bishop's Fion's use of the Denton Auditorium that came before us in June. There was a provision missing in that. That has been addressed, hopefully to everyone's satisfaction. So at this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the contractual agreement with Bishop Fion regarding use of the Denton Auditorium at Attleboro High School.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, we're going to go now to item agenda number 3. And as was communicated to the school committee in the weekly update, when we approved the FY16 operating budget in June, we did so knowing that there would need to be a number of transfers that were made available. Mr. Furtado communicated to us that it appears as though a kindergarten grant from the Commonwealth has come through in a more favorable manner than we anticipated. In addition to that, we don't know the exact amount, but it was expected to not be funded at all, and now it will be. It could be, again, if Mr. Furtado, who just volunteered to run an errand at an inopportune time, should he resurface, he can certainly speak to that, but essentially, it is a modest amount of good news from a budgetary standpoint, not anything that should generate headlines, unfortunately, but between that and the fact that when the school committee made our final round of budget cuts in June, we did, for lack of a better term, overcut by about $30,000 based on the estimate of the cuts we were making and what we needed to get to the point of our actual appropriation. Mr. Furtado, feel free to grab a seat. In light of that, the administration has recommended that instead of appropriating a 1% compensation increase to Attleboro Public Schools employees who are on individual contracts who are not in the group of administrator contracts that are starting anew in FY16, that instead of appropriating a 1% increase, we would instead appropriate a 2% increase. So this is a vote just to authorize the administration to make that transfer. The budgetary impact is approximately $15,000. There are about 25 individuals who are affected by this, and again, the compensation, all of whom, incidentally, were subject to the wage freeze for FY15. The recommendation, as Mr. Furtado said in the memo, would make this compensation increase consistent with the vast majority of employees who are members of various bargaining units. And again, the salary range that we're talking about here for most of these individuals are somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000, maybe $40,000 and $55,000 in some cases. Total budgetary impact is, again, $15,000. This is a very modest budgetary impact, but instead of having the 1% increase, it would be a 2% increase.
So it is 2.
It's a longer explanation, perhaps, than was necessary, but I was stalling for Mr. Furtado to come back, and good to see you again. Does anyone have
So
any
moved.
questions? Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. Again, we are moving around here, so just take a second. Dr. McSweeney, could you join the school committee? Okay, so we are going to, I'm sorry, we have our 6th of 7 collective bargaining agreements that have come before us. This is the administrators union. This is our smallest bargaining unit, not in our hearts, just in total membership. These are assistant principals. Their collective bargaining agreement is consistent with the other collective bargaining agreements. There are some highly favorable provisions that we can thank Mr. Furtado and his negotiating skills for. We will have a lengthier discussion with regard to administrative compensation and the structure of administrative compensation later in the summer, but I think the collective bargaining agreement for the Administrators Association is relatively self-explanatory. If there are any questions about it, now would be a good time to direct them to Mr. Furtado, who did the negotiating on behalf of the committee. Then I'll entertain a motion to approve the collective bargaining agreement for the administrators.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. We are going to table item number 7 with regard to that collective bargaining agreement for the time being. Hopefully come back to it in the near future. And at this time, Dr. McSweeney is here, and I want to thank Dr. McSweeney for being here tonight. I have asked for an update from both Dr. McSweeney and the superintendent about a comprehensive update as to where we are with regard to our special education programming. It's an issue that's been of concern over the past year, really, and that certainly would include the programming that is underway now as part of the extended school year. And I would imagine this is a topic that we will be revisiting periodically, both over the summer and throughout the 15-16 school year, but I wanted to give the administration the opportunity to address the school committee now and share any concerns or issues that may be pertaining to special ed.
On July 14th, I received an email from Chairman Murphy outlining some concerns or a direction for this report this evening, and it actually had approximately 6 bullet points. One was the status of the LEAP program. Another was the update on special education staffing and personnel vacancies. The third was the status of the ESY program. Fourth was the update on special education professional development. The fifth was the status of the 2 job descriptions with regard to the student services coordinator and the team chair people. And the last one was the work that has been yielded by the Special Education Executive Board. So at this time, I want to turn it over to Dr. McSweeney with regard to addressing the first 4 of those issues.
I'd like to begin with, I think, extended year services,
Sure.
since we're right into that time period right now. And right now, we started the extended year program July 13th. We have been working very hard on individual situations that have come up that might be in regards to transportation or transition, making sure that students are transitioning smoothly. I must say that we have had some minor concerns, and we have addressed them on individual basis. I've been working with Mark Furtado and Shannon in the transportation department, and we have done our very best to try to resolve those as quickly as possible. Extended year services, just to help maybe the public understand, are for students that have been identified in their IEP who might substantially regress during this period, summer period. It is for recruitment of skills. It is not just an extension of their school services. It's something that is looked at very, very carefully within that team meeting to make sure that we provide the skills and the instructional strategies for students not to regress substantially. So there's a difference. I think it's important that parents may say, why my child is not receiving these services, and I think it's important that they understand that it is within the team process, that it should be reviewed during their team meetings, and it is primarily to make sure that students do not lose skill sets, and that it's experience substantial regression. So it's something that they should be aware of, parents should be aware of, and make sure that within each team meeting during the year that is something that is being discussed. So at this point, we have several children in our early learning program. Also in the elementary school, there are approximately 173 students that are participating this year. Some parents have chosen not to have their children attend, even though it might be in their IEP meeting. However, I've been informed the majority within the early learning center and elementary school have attended this summer. There are approximately 81 students attending in the middle school and 34 in the high school. And there have been families that have chosen not to attend or have their children attend, and in each one of those levels. And sometimes it's just the family dynamic and what's going on, and we certainly respect that. I'll move on unless there's, okay.
Are there questions with regard to ESY, Mr. Withers?
One question, I'm just curious on what type of minor issues, have been occurring? I mean,
There have been some transportation issues that have occurred, that just trying to figure out bus stops and where students are, making sure that when we're picking children up, it's in a safe place. There have also been students that have come after it has started, which is really difficult also for our transportation department to anticipate this, because again, families can participate at any point because it is part of their individual education plan, but they may not choose to participate the whole summer, and they haven't told us prior.
okay,
And that's difficult to arrange.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments with regard to ESY? I mean, one thing that the school committee tries not to do is to draw conclusions off of anecdotal evidence. I would say that in terms of some of the numbers that have gone back and forth just in various reports that we've received, there do seem to be some fairly broad discrepancies in terms of the numbers that were expected versus numbers that were realized. And I do, again, I don't want to draw conclusions off of anecdotal evidence, but I think it's fair to say we do have some concerns over the processes that are in place in terms of making these determinations. So I would just encourage the administration to reflect upon that in terms of additional planning.
I do have a recommendation for the school
Okay.
committee, and just, one of the recommendations I would have is that we try to plan earlier in the school year when our summer program will start. That's something coming on board late that I was not able to make that recommendation, but I think it would be helpful for families to plan if we were able to maybe come forward and talk to the school committee about timelines at an
Yeah,
earlier time.
and I don't know that we have, we may, but if we have timelines that are in place via policy that need to be adjusted, I would say that we are eager to review those, particularly if you're seeing evidence that they're not appropriate or they're not working well. And I think the more expeditiously the administration brings those issues to our attention, I think that we'll be eager to respond and to hear the recommendations. But if there are other timelines that are not dictated by the school committee, I would say it's incumbent upon the administration to make sure that those timelines and deadlines are reflective of best practices.
There is no policy that governs the timelines by the school committee currently.
Okay.
At the same time, we have to understand that the school calendar actually has a lot to do with the starting of the ESY program, because in this particular year, because we've ended school so late,
Right.
In other years, ESY would have been already started. But so snow days and some of those things, because of what the action has been of the school committee and the recommendations from LABIS, calendar, et cetera, we'll be able to start the ESY program earlier in the school year. Most ESY programs have usually started after the 4th of July weekend or that holiday. I envision with us targeting the week of the 14th or 16th of June being our last days of school, that we'll be able to get some weeks in prior to the 4th of July holiday. And giving people at the other end of it a longer vacation with their children without going to school in ESY. So I think those are the things that will be discussed going forward.
Yeah, and I think that they are appropriate discussions to have. I think obviously we need to make sure that we're following best practices to make sure that it's starting and ending in a way to achieve the goals of ESY, which is obviously to
Right.
avoid regression. But Mrs. Gelson,
Yeah,
apologize.
and based on what Dave just said, having, the two before and the two after, having it off, the 2 and 2 in between. It's that's ideal, but, when you're starting to do 3 weeks at a time, and that's when you're gonna start seeing that regression as far as, historically has been, so.
Sure.
I would hate to see it being extended even longer, but based on best practices.
Yeah, and I think that's our point. And
Yeah.
the school committee is, I mean, this is always the case when we're talking about special ed and most topics, frankly. We're not saying that you should have this number of days or this number of weeks, you should start on this date. We're saying that best practices need to be followed. And where there are times in which there's evidence building that best practices are not being followed, then it's our expectation that that practice will be changed.
So moving on to the personnel vacancies. We have been working to fulfill the Middle School Insights program. This is a program for our students moving from the elementary school to the middle school. These children have the opportunity now to be part of our middle school community, which is exciting. We do have a final teacher candidate that has been recommended, and we're at the final stages of that. There are ABA that are part of that program that have also been recommended, and again, we're in the final stages of that. There are still some ongoing reviews of resumes and interviews that need to be scheduled. We have our Willett Insights teacher. Also, the high school LPN is under review. Those resumes are under review. Our team chair vacancies, there are still 2 of those, one at Hill Roberts and one at Coelho. All others have been recommended. Student service coordinators, recommendations have been made, and that process, it's now going into the approval, final phases of that. Educational diagnostician, due to retirement at the elementary level, that has been, interviews have been conducted and a finalist has been identified. And then the transition position still needs to be posted on School Spring. We also have had some ABA positions at the elementary school, Thatcher Elementary School, that have currently happened, and we are posting that. That's gone.
I mean, the vacancy has happened?
Vacancies, yes.
Okay, how many at Thatcher?
2, I believe.
Okay. And so, am I correct in saying that we have at least 3 positions that are identified as being vacant that need to be posted right now? And I understand there may be internal candidates, and so maybe they're perhaps that has to do with the urgency, but the transition position and then the 2 ABAs at Thatcher,
Yes.
is that the entire universe of positions that we know about that need to be posted this summer?
I believe under the special ed department, yes. There still is always that opportunity that we may still receive resignations, as you
Sure.
well know, but
Right.
right now, currently.
But right now, we've identified 3 positions for which that we anticipate filling that need to be posted, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and is there a timeline on when those postings will be made?
I believe quite soon. They have been developed and sent to be ready for posting.
Okay.
And I did see just I think this evening, the ABAs posted.
Okay.
So
Alright.
we're on top of that.
Okay, and I just, there have been a lot of questions that have been raised, going back now 12 months, about positions in various programs and buildings and vacancies that occurred, and I know that to some degree there's just been an ongoing dialogue as to what the actual need is and what our capacity is, but I think for tonight's purposes, I think the administration should know that the school committee is concerned about making sure that the appropriate number of positions exist and are filled. And again, we've got some capacity issues, and I think we've talked about that at length here, that right now, we don't have the funding to fill the personnel roster in the way that we'd like. But to the degree that we've identified what we can do, it's our expectation that the administration will move expeditiously to do that. Okay.
So just to contribute to that update, the transition specialist has been posted,
Right.
and I believe the ABAs have been posted. And today we met with the person who was recommended for the New Insights program.
Great.
And we processed her today.
Beautiful.
And the contracts have been written for the other 5 ABA positions are ready to go forward.
Okay. All right, moving on.
Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the LEAP program.
Sure.
And to share with you that the LEAP program at Thatcher will continue for students in grades 1 through 4. For our early learning center students that are transitioning to kindergarten, they will be provided with services in the least restrictive environment and will be attending their neighborhood schools. Their services will be provided and guided by the individual educational plan. This was an opportunity for these children to have access to the least restrictive environments and for educational benefit, which was critical for our youngest of students. Our special ed teams, as you know, are mandated to consider at all times the least restrictive environments. And that was important as we move forward and we plan for children. In addition, we will continue to look at our programs. We'll continue to develop continuum of services. We will, it's one of our priorities to continue to do that because we want to keep students in district and we want to make sure that we're developing a full range of services for all of our learners, not only our youngest, all the way to our 12-plus students.
Okay. Mr. Withers?
What is the LEAP program?
The LEAP program, and I will refer more, I want to be accurate here, so I just don't want to talk off cuff, but our LEAP program is a substantially separate program that is in Thatcher Elementary School. It is designed to work with children that are significantly below grade level and who have indicated that there's a need for intensive programming for them. It is the understanding of the teams and also the principals have been involved in this process as well, that there is that opportunity for these children to have their services within their neighborhood schools with their like peers and still have educational benefit. So it's a separate program, and we look to have our children as included as much as we can, and particularly for our young learners to make sure that we are considering that and giving them every opportunity in that least restrictive environment.
Okay.
Is this a, sorry,
Uh,
Phil, is this a change from what we did last year?
Yes,
Yep.
it is a change.
Okay.
Change is only concentrated at the kindergarten level, though, correct?
And it's a yes, it's looking and it's a refinement, that's right.
Okay, but there is no change to the structure of the programming in grades 1 through 4, is
There
that
is no
accurate?
change.
But there is a change at the kindergarten level?
The ELC students moving up.
Okay.
Yes.
So, am I correct to say that whereas in the past there would have been a substantially separate kindergarten program located, at least as of last year, at Thatcher, that program will not exist? Is that accurate?
Yes,
Okay.
that's accurate.
I do think this might be an issue that we want to come back to, but I don't know that we need to tonight, unless there are other issues or problems related to this that you can bring to our attention now. I think it might be something that we have questions on at a later date.
The only thing I can say,
Yep.
and is we would be a responsive system. If there is a child that comes into the district that could not adequately have their needs met in the kindergarten program in their neighborhood school, then we would have to look at that.
Sure.
And that's something that we're required to do.
Thank you. Okay. I'm sorry, was there a question?
And then the last is professional development.
Sure.
And again, being responsive to what our needs are in the district and working with the professional development committee that I'm involved in at the district level, that we looked and at the teacher surveys. Not only what we needed to do for compliance, but we also looked and considered and analyzed the teacher surveys and what their needs were. And what you will see that was presented in your packet are areas that were necessary, as well as areas that teachers have said they really would like to see more professional development in. I feel as though we have captured most of what they would like. There's still room and for us to grow and expand, but there are some areas that we require to get our staff ready for, particularly the CPR, Coordinated Program Review, which will be taking place this year. We have done the district self-assessment. We have turned that into the Department of Education, but it's now important that staff understand what that means and what will be required of us. We will have an on-site visit next year. And there will be interviews conducted not only with staff but parents, and it's important that we do that well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's also important to recognize that there are new regulations that take place every single year. One of those new regulations are the physical restraint regulations that our people have to be, trained in. Make sure that we offer that training to them and they participate. So that's mandatory training. At the same time, we're moving from an easy IEP, that's what they call the IEP document and system within Attleboro, to the Aspen IEP. Training has to take place with regard to that. So we have access to written IEPs from every student in the district, from central office and from other schools as well, reviewing IEPs from Aspen instead of the easy IEP. It's one of the modules that we discussed 2 years ago in the Aspen program.
Right.
So that's one of the formats that we want to develop, and we have.
Okay.
Staff
good.
and administrators need to have the PD associated with that implementation.
Thank you. Mrs.
I just
Gels.
have a quick question. I don't know if it's for Dr. McSweeney or for Mr. Sawyer. I know that there was some request by the guidance department to have more, maybe some professional development on transitional opportunities for the post-secondary, for those kids looking for some college experience, or even just not even college, but work experience. Do you know if they're going to move forward with that? Have you heard?
That is in discussion, and that is on the list of things to take on
Okay.
for the coming year. I can't say that I know exactly what they're going to do to address it,
Okay.
but it has been part of the discussion of the needs of the guidance department.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If we could maybe just put that on the list for the next special ed update as to where that is in terms of those guidance opportunities. Any other questions related to special education? Mr. Larson.
This is more just of a general special ed question, and it's not specific to some of the bullets that the chairman outlined, but it's more of a curiosity question for me, just because I know you're finishing up your first year. And it's more from a curiosity point of view. And I know you have a staff that works with you, but from an in-classroom experience, what is your goal or your department's goal for you and your staff getting to each of the buildings and being in each of the classes? And I mean, I know you're still finishing up the first year, so you might not have actually gotten to every one of the classes at this point, but going forward, what would your expectation for you and your staff to be as far as visible in every one of the classrooms throughout the district that has a special ed component to it? Just my curiosity.
Yeah, my response to that is it's critical. I had, with many of the initiatives that happened this year and being new to the position, particularly CPR, which is extremely time intensive, that it's so critical that we get, and I get into those classrooms and appreciate what is happening, the good teaching that's going on, as well as the opportunity to share and make recommendations. I think one mechanism that has been excellent has been the learning walks that have taken place that allows a group to go in and to observe, and that happens within the schools. But I think my priority is, and my staff priority is, and I need to make sure it's clear and articulated, we need to be in the buildings. That's where the action is happening. That is where kids are receiving their services. I need to be more familiar with that, particularly if I'm talking regarding continuum of services. How do I and my staff know what direction to go if we're not in there seeing what's going on? So I appreciate your stating that, and I think it's critical for me, making it a priority. One suggestion too, which I thought was interesting, is trying to be there in one building even just one day a week. You know, making sure each day you're in at least on a rotating basis. So it's certainly a goal for me.
Just as a follow-up, so would it be safe to say that you'd like to get into every classroom a couple times a year at a minimum? I mean, I'm just,
Yes,
okay. It's just,
yes. It's where that's my passion, that's my joy, so yes.
Okay. Very good, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, so again, you know, I know it may seem as though the school committee has a tendency to sort of have a standing special education agenda item. I think it should be viewed, and I hopefully it's clear, and I know Dr. McSweeney, you and I have spoken many times, Mr. Sheen and I have spoken many times. We do have concerns over various things that are happening within the department. That's been, I think, a pretty consistent message from the school committee over the past year. So I would expect that we would continue to have questions and to want to see, hopefully, as much evidence of progress in terms of making sure that whatever hiccups are inevitable, and many of them are when we're servicing the sized population that we are in the district, across the entire district, not just in special ed. I mean, you can't be educating 6,000 students coming from 4,000 families and not have challenges and problems that have come up. But I think we have, again, I think the committee's message has been pretty clear and pretty consistent over the course of the past year that it's our expectation that things will sort of move in an efficient, student-oriented way, and we won't see maybe some of the difficulties we've had, whether that's in trying to figure out where students are supposed to be, or whether it's communication issues. I mentioned that I think we are going to have questions with regard to the LEAP program. One of the things that we had said over and over again coming out of the 14-15 school year was that if there are going to be significant programming changes, then we want to do everything we can to make sure those determinations are made in a way that is accommodating to families and, most importantly, to students. If we know that these are the best decisions that we can make, that's good, and we should make them regardless of what the timing is or what the other things other problems that we're trying to avoid. But if they're decisions that can be made in January, then they shouldn't be made in May. And that's our expectation. So again, we'll continue this discussion, and Dr. McSweeney, thank you for again keeping us updated, for coming in. We will we'll continue the discussions in the future. So thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, Mr. Furtado, another area that we've had some concerns on occasion is in our delivery of transportation services, and we know that intersects with virtually all other components of the district, and you and your staff have been working diligently over the past several months to make sure that we don't just avoid some of the problems that we have over the past year, but that we're looking at what ways we can provide even more successful, efficient, student-oriented, non-problematic, non-crisis-inducing transportation service. So I asked if you could just provide us with a comprehensive update as to where we are. We are interested with regard to where we are from a summer standpoint, although I think we kind of just got a sense of that in a variety of ways. So perhaps if we could focus the discussion for the time being, unless I'm missing something, on where we are in terms of preparations for the 15-16 school year, and the, I think, unequivocal mandate from the school committee to make sure that we have a smoother opening than we did last year.
Be happy to, Mr. Chairman. I do want to assure the committee that the process being followed now in preparation for school in September is dramatically different from what was happening before. We took the Aspen student database and went over literally each of our 6,000 addresses in the context of school committee policy, historic safety decisions, and again, the changes in fee-for-service requirements. We have reconfigured the entire database. It was an extraordinary task. There were significant errors in the database. When we finished that work, we posted that information on the website under the Transportation Department's page, so that it's now clear for parents. They can see what their status is based on their address. The status is consistent across all addresses in the city of Attleboro. We are undertaking a real-time and continuous exam on safety issues as they are relayed to us by parents, by the bus company, by anybody who has concerns. We are updating that status literally daily. In conjunction with all of that, have been working with the staff here who are intimate with Aspen to understand the rollover of students into the new schools for this year, making sure the data there is accurate, and there are some issues there that we've cleaned up. We have loaded our Aspen database into Bloom's Bus Boss and are configuring the routes as we're speaking, literally. They have a deadline of July 31st for the production of the routes. We are going to run the routes in the first week of August to check the stops and how they look, in real life as opposed to on a map. Make adjustments the second week of August and submit the routes to the Attleboro Sun on their requested date of August 10th.
So we think Sun Chronicle publication, we're sending to them on August 10th?
That's their requirement of us. Yeah, we could
They
get
are
earlier, but there's no value to doing that. They're going to publish on the same day, August 27th, I think, or something like that. We will have it up on our website before that.
Have we asked the Sun Chronicle if they might be willing to publish it earlier, or?
They gave us their timelines and brought it back to August 10th for a submission.
So, just to be clear,
Yes.
it's not like me to argue with the Sun Chronicle. All right.
No, you probably shouldn't.
But,
And I may have the publication date wrong. I don't remember that off the top of my head. I know that we have an obligation for August 10th.
in order for it to be published on August 27th?
I'm not sure about the 27th date.
Okay. Am I missing something, or is there a big benefit to having it published as early as possible, so that way if people have questions or concerns, they can potentially have them vetted?
I don't think we're the only school system they publish.
We're the only one with this school committee, the only one that I ever seen.
So
The only one, the only, none of the people from Seekonk have been calling me the
They
first week of September,
dedicate
so.
an addition to school transportation. We're part of that publication.
I see. Well, okay. That is something we'll have to take a look at. And it's good that we know that they will be published on our website, and that we will use all of our developing communication tools to get that message out. And perhaps, I know there are people in the Attleboro schools who have connections to the Sun Chronicle. That's been proven in various ways, and perhaps someone will see fit to publish them earlier, so people can get a
Yeah,
sense of where
the
the bus stop
27th
is.
may be off, and maybe the 17th, and maybe the 19th.
So maybe you're throwing the Sun Chronicle under the bus.
I could be completely wrong on that date. Yes.
All right.
I didn't make.
Well,
note.
I mean, my point is, I think we want to get we want to have the most accurate information out as early as possible to try to do as much troubleshooting as we can. I think that's.
And we will have the the information accurate as of August 10th in their hands on August 10th. We don't have any concerns about not meeting that
On
deadline.
our side. Okay. Mr. Withers?
So it's gonna go up on the website, August 10th?
Yes.
And has it been, or communicated to the parents? And if not yet, has it been contemplated how the word will get out there that as of August 10th, go to our website to, check out the bus routes? So that, even though it's a couple weeks before it's published, potentially.
We have a page on the transportation page right now that is instructing parents what needs to be done to prepare for the opening of school. And once we've had the bus routes, that will be added to that communication along with the listing for the parents to look at.
Okay.
We are still comfortable with the notion that we're going to be running 29 buses. It certainly won't be less than that. Again, the changes that we've made have increased student populations, but we still today believe 29 buses is going to accommodate those changes. Fee-for-service families have been notified of their status. As we continue to undertake the kind of safety review, if that status changes, we call rather than write, we call directly to those families and indicate that their status has changed, so they have real-time information on where they stand in terms of transportation.
Okay. Mr. Larson, do you have a question?
I have two comments and one question.
Sure.
First, once the routes are up on the website and we're comfortable with them, I would think we could send an all call out to everybody and tell parents that it's up there if they want to look.
Yes.
Simple enough. My second.
The Sun Chronicle even publish and say it's on our website.
It could, you never know.
I know they want to keep tight wraps on things, but perhaps we could let the cat out of the bag. Sorry.
That's okay. I could see you, just.
Yeah.
My second comment is a thanks to you and your staff. We didn't have to go up to the City Hall and explain any transportation issues as we closed out the end of school, which was much more enjoyable this year to not have to do that as in the past 2 years. So again, my thanks to you and your staff, who I know have been working extremely hard to make that happen, and your work with Deb Gould, because I know she's a big help there.
She's been invaluable, and that was the case when I was here last time. She's just been terrific to work with.
My last question. I know when we first brought the policy changes for fee-for-service through, there were a couple of action items that were to be determined, and one of them was where we were actually going to be measuring the distance from at each school. Has that been determined through the policy or from your office or from transportation? So if a parent is actually asking, my son or my daughter goes to
Yes.
ABC school, is there a spot that we're actually measuring from? Has that been determined, or
Yeah,
are we
it's
still?
it's door to driveway at the schools. It's Google Maps, which is the only consistent interface that'll work with Aspen. So again, we can't get into arguments about tenths of a mile with a parent. That's not relevant, because all of the parents have been measured on the same basis. So, statistically, if you're off by a tenth over here, someone over here is off by a tenth, and the technology has allowed us to provide a consistent standard measurement for everybody. We can't account for the variability.
Okay, because I know some of the walkers will, if you're using Google and you're actually using streets, doesn't account for the fact that some of the distances are across open fields or.
The paths were
Yeah.
part of our calculation.
Okay, so they are.
That has not changed from the historical practice.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Good question, Mr. Larson. Any other questions or comments related to, Mr. Furtado, did you have any other general transportation matters?
Well, just that we have, as the committee is aware, we've kind of rationalized the out-of-district transportation to kind of optimize things financially. That was done on the fly, so that's, we received benefit, but not the full benefit had we started from day one. as the out-of-district population is being identified to us, that's kind of happening again real time. So our own transportation system, which again will be exclusive to vans, is being configured precisely to minimize costs for out-of-district transportation. So there'll be some additional benefits, we believe, during the course of the year from that.
That's good, and thank you for that, and obviously thanks to Ms. Shepherd as well in your office for the work that she's done. You know, oftentimes I think the school committee speaks in sort of general terms with the expectation that the administration will sort of be able to accurately interpret what we're looking for. I think that's certainly the case with regard to special education. I think, you know, perhaps with transportation, there's no need to speak in as general terms. It's our expectation that the opening of school will run 100% differently on the operational side than it did last year.
Yes, I want to say this kind of proactively. I think the committee should expect to still be hearing from parents.
Mhm.
I mean, that's first of all normal for the start of school year, but second of all, from where we're coming from, what you'll be hearing from in terms of the parent population is not from the parents who are being harmed in some way, because again, I think the process and the system will show that everybody's being treated equally. I think what the committee needs to be concerned with and thoughtful about is you're going to be hearing from parents who were accommodated unreasonably in the past and are not seeing that now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm not talking about phone calls.
Yeah.
You know, that our job is to take phone calls and take complaints, and anyone who's not able to sort of appropriately analyze the complaint, be as responsive as possible, but also understand that the customer is always right mentality does not necessarily translate into a public school setting. But I think in terms of the sort of systemic structural breakdowns, those are the things that we as a district, we can't afford to happen again.
Right.
It's why the school committee and the administration, your office in particular, has taken, have spent frankly the amount of time we have over the course of the past year. And but you know, from the community standpoint, it's not, you know, good enough to, you know, the time is nobody cares how much time we spend. They just want to get it right. So. But again, thank you for all your work, and thank you to Ms. Shepherd. And I would expect that this is an issue that we'll revisit in August as well, just to make sure that we've done everything we can from a due diligence standpoint to get where we need to be. Okay. With that, we will move off of transportation for the time being, and on to a couple of policy items that have been mentioned before the full school committee, but were analyzed and discussed at length at the policy subcommittee level. I did mention it as we were closing out the school year on June 29th, and I expected that we would hopefully have some final drafts for our consideration as quickly as possible. They pertain to two items that are sort of connected, but not really directly related to one another, and it has to do with the enrollment of students. Mr. Withers, our policy chair, I've asked to talk a little bit about the enrollment of the children of non-resident staff. This is an issue that has a long history in Attleboro. Frankly, there was a time in which it was the norm that the school committee offered staff members the opportunity to enroll their children. It is frankly the norm in many other districts across the Commonwealth. There's a sort of a history as to how that policy got changed, but there's sort of a two-prong problem with it. One, it's a benefit that was, for reasons that I don't know that are totally justifiable, that was taken away from staff. And also, right now, the sort of basic read of the policy is that the authority to make these types of decisions are vested with the school committee. Making decisions about individual students is, by definition, not a policy judgment. And so I have questions as to how that ended up in the hands of the school committee, but this is sort of what the policy subcommittee has been working to address, and I think there are some other benefits as well. So, Mr. Withers, if you want to.
Sure.
Is that a good intro for you?
It's a great intro. You took the first part of my spiel, so thank you.
Sorry, I had a tendency to do that stuff.
So you have the draft policy, JFA, in your packet. As Chairman Murphy said, this is a benefit to staff that historically was granted to students until granted to staff until the mid-90s or so. I think it's a policy that, when you think about it, makes sense. It's a benefit to to our employees that can make their lives easier, and it's a nice olive branch to give them, especially in times of tight budget cycles where they're not getting much in the ways of raises. And it also it cultivates the idea of Attleboro and our teachers and everyone having a stakeholder being a stakeholder in our education, which is something we've talked about a lot in the strategic planning. Obviously, we're lucky we have great teachers, but if those teachers also have students coming through the district, that can even make them feel like more of a part of our community. I think it will possibly boost enrollment, which could potentially help with funding. And I think something that was mentioned as a possible drawback was class sizes, but I think when you think about the numbers we're talking about here, any class size changes would be minor. We wouldn't see any major changes that would be harmful, and it puts the ball back in the court of the superintendent, really, which is who should be making these decisions, rather than the school committee. And again, I think the policy itself is pretty straightforward on what the considerations are, who qualifies for it, and I think the reasons, when you think about it, are pretty clear cut.
Yeah, I would just add that I think the difference between the old policy is it's to the best of our knowledge, was that before it was an entitlement, whereas this is a determination that the superintendent can make based on capacity issues, based on the best interests of the student, and then there are other considerations that can be taken into account, because it well may be the case. I mean, I think it was 6th grade at the middle school level, obviously 6th grade at the middle school level, but 6th grade last year where we had a particular bulge in enrollment, such that it may have been the case had a staff member applied for enrollment in that particular grade level that we may not have been able to accommodate that. This policy, unlike the one from some decades ago, takes that into account, where first of all, this is the sole discretion of the superintendent to admit or not admit. Capacity is to receive the student is one of the things that he or she, the superintendent, would be expected to take into account. Some of the other considerations are if this is a staff member who either their children happen to be enrolled in the schools and the staff member moves out, it allows for that to be taken into account in the hopes of providing some continuity to that family. Same thing if we've got a staff member, and it very well might be the case that we have a new staff member who's coming into the community, coming into the district. He or she intends to establish residency in Attleboro but has not yet, rather than run the risk that staff member's child may have to transfer mid-year. That's something the superintendent could take into account. And so I think from a procedural, structural standpoint, I think, as Mr. Withers said, it puts the discrete decision-making back into the hands of the administration. And from a policy standpoint, it sort of sends a message that we as a school committee and as a district are looking to cultivate that stronger relationship with staff members in the hopes of helping to strengthen the community of schools as a whole. So, were there any other questions related to this? We will, I'll talk a little bit when we get to the next policy about sort of how we are attempting to implement this. One part of this policy is that an application for enrollment needs to be received by May 1st of the preceding academic year. That says May 15th on the copy you have. It should say May 1st. Mr. Sarek could expand upon the reasons for that, but it's just we're trying to be uniform in terms of our enrollment deadlines. May 1st is sort of the magic date. That being said, for both this policy and for the next one, we have essentially developed an idea for a trial window or pilot program that will allow short windows of time in which, if people would like to apply for the 15-16 school year, they may do so. It will have a very limited effect. Frankly, there aren't going to be a lot of people, I think, rushing in, given that we're already almost halfway through the summer already, which is probably not what a lot of people want to hear, but it's more or less true. But it will give us the sense, an ability to sort of review this over both policies over the course of the next year and sort of check our work related to that. So, any questions or comments? Okay, so right now we're just going to take a vote on the adoption of the policy itself with that amendment that I just mentioned, that this is a May 1st deadline actually in the policy. When we go through the kindergarten one, we'll then take action with regard to the pilot program nature for 15-16. So a motion to approve policy JFA.
So moved. Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We have an accompanying policy, which is policy JF. This is just a procedural. We have one typographical issue, and then it just adds a bullet point referencing policy JFA, which we just added to the book. So no substantive change with regard to this. But I'd entertain a motion to approve policy JF as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Mr. Larson?
This is the one, the kindergarten screening?
No, this is the policy that needs to be amended in order to allow JFA to take effect.
But it provides residency requirements and what you need for proof
Oh,
of
okay.
residency, and it
Okay.
adds the exception for JFA.
Okay.
That way JFA is not on an island unto itself.
Okay.
So a motion to approve policy JF as amended, which I believe has already been seconded, so all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Okay, so that is policy JF, and the administration has provided a form for you today that, in fact, this form, this is an application that would be used by staff members, and with their explanation as to their basis, it cites to the policy. This would actually would be appropriate to approve as an exhibit to policy JFA. So it would be, I'd look for a motion to approve exhibit 1 to policy JFA, which will be this application.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, so that will put JFA to bed for the time being, and we'll move on to our next item, which is another issue that's been discussed several times at the policy subcommittee. I know Mr. Sawyer, Ms. DeAngelis, Ms. Dyer, a number of staff members have been working on this over the past couple of months and discussing it. Essentially, the crux of the issue, and Mr. Sawyer is going to speak to a minute as to the proposed resolution, but the crux of the issue is, as a district, for purposes of kindergarten enrollment, we have a hard deadline of September 1st. And every year, there are families in the community who say, my child's birthday is September 5th, my child's ready for kindergarten. Well, how can you say that those 5 days should keep he or she out? This policy does not change that. This policy keeps the deadline at September 1st. You are not entitled to enroll if your birthday is not on September 1st or before. But what this does do is it contemplates essentially a appeal period of the month of September where families may apply to have their child screened for purposes of readiness, which Mr. Sawyer will speak to momentarily. And while there's still a presumption against enrollment based on the fact that you have to apply and be screened, it would allow for a period by which we could do sort of some more thoughtful analysis and then render a decision which is not appealable. And if you don't get in, you're just as unlucky as you would have been had we never changed the policy. But it at least allows a short period of time in which we can at least sort of step away from the notion that there's something magical about the date September 1st. So, Mr. Sawyer, do you want to?
Yeah, so this is an annual concern. Every year, and I mean every year, we have parents who are frustrated by the policy in question, in particular because they have students who are, born on September 3rd, and they want me to explain why I think that their child is somehow less ready than someone who was born on August 31st, and there's no good answer for that. In our discussions both here and at central office about what we should do, what would a thoughtful policy do to address this concern, we looked hard at the numbers in the district. We found that any assumptions about perhaps the younger kids in any given grade being the ones that struggle a bit more as a result of their age do not bear out in the data by the time you start having achievement data available in late elementary. I mean, I think there's plenty of anecdotal evidence to say that younger kids in kindergarten are sometimes less ready than the older kids. As a parent of two young boys in their grade, I know that they had some readiness issues, to be sure. But by the time you get to third and fourth grade, it really evens out, and you can't see any difference in achievement scores. And not that that's the only measure, but that's certainly the best measure we have. There's no difference in birthdays. The kids that are with August birthdays, are doing just as well as the kids with, October birthdays. So, that to the fact that we did some research on this, and study after study shows that we do not have a good measure for future success at the age of kindergarten. Our screening is not a predictor of success. It is a screening that allows us to identify specific student needs and helps us to get to know kids and make good decisions about placement so that we can create the right kind of class environments for our schools. So while screening is important, it does not necessarily help us to say whether this student or that student is more prepared than the other one. So back to the problem, there is no tried and true or efficient way to say this child is ready and this one is not. So certainly it is in the end the case, as has been the suspicion all along, that age is not a good determining factor. It's not the one that will help us to determine. So I think that this grace period is wise because it gives us a little bit of a time where we can look at students and have a little bit of freedom and use our discretion to do what we think is in the best interest of students.
Thank you, Mr. Sawyer. I want to see if there are questions or comments, but the one point I want to address, because it came up frequently at the subcommittee level, is that some will perceive this as just pushing the date from September 1st to October 1st. That's not what's happening here. Right now, we have a two-pronged system. You're September 1st or before, or you're after. This changes to a three-pronged system, where you're September 1st or before, you're September 2nd to September 30th, or you're October 1st or later. And that is not a perfect system, and we're not going to find a perfect system, but it does inject a new process by which we can at least render decisions that are have a justification that is less arbitrary than simply birthday. But if anyone is looking for a perfect solution on this, you've come to the wrong place. So, questions, comments for Mr. Sawyer? Mr. Larson.
I have to preface my statement by, I have two children with September birthdays, so we lived through this twice. Everybody lives through everything.
No, that's not true. Some people don't. Some people, they're not here to tell you.
Well, that's
they
fine.
didn't.
Okay. I guess at some point there needs to be a line in the sand, and whatever line you pick, the people whose birthdays are on October 2nd are going to be the ones this year that want to know why they're not eligible for the screening that the people born the day before were. So I guess we're putting the can of worms off a month, in my opinion. We're also creating a lot of work for some people in central office who have got to screen these children that, personally, my gut reaction is I think they've got other things that they could be doing instead. I'm just not sure there's a big enough benefit to the amount of people involved to do this whole thing. And again, I lived through it both times, and quite honestly, I think whichever way you go, whatever date you pick, there are going to be people that are happy and unhappy. And if you want to move the date, that's fine. But I think as far as creating this screening process for people to have to be evaluated and the rest of all that, then you're going to have people who get in because they were screened, and you have people who aren't going to get in because they were screened. And I first looked at it and I said, what part of it's broke that is fixable? And I'm not sure whatever is broken is fixable. I mean, there is no perfect answer to it. There never will be a perfect answer to it. And it's creating work for people that I'm not sure need more work to be created for them.
Mr. Withers?
I was gonna say, the kindergarten screening's going on already, right? These kids would just be added to the
Yeah.
existing screening, so it wouldn't really be.
It's not an
added-
extra screening.
Right,
They would just, it's
Part
another
of-
student that needs to be screened.
right, but it'd be as a part of the screening
It'd be part of
process.
the full screening,
Right.
which we do as much as we can at the end of June.
Mhm.
And for people who register in the summer, we do the first week, which is part of why kindergarten has a later start date.
And this, I would, the another thing, because I think Mr. Larson's concerns are valid. I think that the May 1st deadline here, the idea is, unlike students that are entitled to come in and need to be screened and therefore will be screened over the summer, the idea here is that they'll be, if you want to take advantage of this grace period, you need to apply by May 1st, presumably by age 4, you know when your child's birthday is, and so you then will have that period in June when we have those rounds of screening to be done. Also, like the children of non-resident staff, the idea here, and we will, if this is to pass, we'll act on the second piece momentarily, but for the 15-16 school year, we will open up a narrow window by which we estimate, based on class sizes, the 24 or so potential applicants. I can't imagine we'd have 100% application rate. 100% of them don't complain every year, so I'm assuming that some will not want to take advantage of it. But we will have the 15-16 school year to review and assess and to make a determination as to whether or not this is not beneficial to students, at which point we will certainly address that in a swift manner, or perhaps the administrative burdens outweigh the overall benefits, at which point that discussion will be had. So I think that's sort of, and certainly, like I said, I think the points are valid, but I think that's the attempt here in the proposed policy to mitigate the concerns as much as possible. So other questions or comments? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the amendments to policy JEB.
So moved.
Second. And just a note, there is an amendment here as well. May 15th is in your draft. May 1st would be the deadline. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion passes. So there are so now the last piece. The policies as adopted are really effective for the 16-17 school year. However, for purposes of determining whether or not we're making the decisions that are in the best interests of students in the community, I have provided this sort of qualifying instruction, which reads as follows: the proposed amendments to school committee, now the approved amendments to school committee policies JEB and JFE, both contemplate deadlines of May 1st of the previous academic year. For purposes of implementation and to examine the effectiveness of the policy amendments and advancing the policy objectives, a birthday window of September 2nd to 15th for school committee policy JEB for purposes of the 2015-2016 academic year, and an application window of July 24th to August 7th for purposes of the 2015-2016 academic year is hereby proposed. So
Sorry.
I thought we just put a thank you. In a second.
Second.
There you go. Mr. Withers.
I understand the reason for the application window. But what's the reasoning for shortening the September?
I think the administrative concerns that Mr.
Okay.
Larson spoke to, I think that it's very late in the year, one, for us to be adding these administrative tasks. And also, I think that the pool of individuals affected is somewhat reduced by the fact that we're not looking at this, we're not finalizing this until halfway through the summer. We're doing it as expeditiously as we could and as early as we could, given what we have to accomplish. But I think that that's part of it. And I think that in terms of how did we pick the 15-day window, it's the 15-day window that is closest to the arbitrary deadline that people were being perceived to be detrimentally affected by.
Sure.
So I think that's another, not really a perfect answer, but it's sort of trying to take all the sort of various interests and make the best compromise that we can.
Got it.
But yeah, not perfect.
That makes sense.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so the motion's on the table, so motion to, just all in favor of approving the implementation plan?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We're slipping into summer mode quickly here, I can tell by the, by the second. Okay, thank you for that. And now, I think we're down to our final agenda item, which is, public agenda item at least. As the committee knows and administration knows, President Cook and I have committed to quarterly briefings of the two governing bodies of the Attleboro community, the City Council and the School Committee. I am scheduled to appear before the Municipal Council again on this Thursday, July 23rd. I wanted to just sort of give the school committee a preview. I circulated over the weekend the correspondence that I have provided to the Municipal Council. I am, as always, eager to receive their questions and hear their comments. And but the three pieces of information that I'm prepared to discuss on Thursday evening before the council is our appointment last night of Mr. Sawyer as the superintendent-elect. In that transition process, the ongoing strategic planning project that we discussed just last week, and we will be taking up again in earnest in August. And then the financial circumstances under which the district is preparing to operate, which I was hoping we might endorse the memo that's gone from the school committee to the city council tonight. Essentially, what that memo, which is available to the public and anyone else interested, essentially outlines the idea that I think we need to get away from this idea that we're only in the midst of a financial crisis when we're actually developing and voting on the budget. We have said repeatedly now for several months that the financial conditions under which the school system is operating are not sustainable. We have had problems that have been exacerbated by a combination of structural issues and frankly, some prioritizing. And I think that given some of the communications that went back and forth between the mayor and the municipal council during the budget process, not all of which were ultimately adopted, but some were, all of which were presented in public. I think it's incumbent upon the school committee to communicate in a thoughtful and detail-oriented way the degree to which these financial circumstances and the difficulty that they're causing are real, and that they're manifesting themselves in a way that is detrimentally affecting the school system. And so I'm hopeful that everyone is cognizant of that. I think when the budget message says that there's an appreciation and an understanding of the school committee's role in making the request that we did, a request in we talked about 8 times publicly was our hope at potentially developing some type of compromise between what we were requesting, which was based on the needs of the district, and what the city felt could be appropriated. I think when that's followed by a message about, in order to accommodate our request, multiple departments would have to close, I would suggest perhaps that's not exactly an appreciation or an understanding. I think that's an implicit way of saying that the school committee is being unreasonable, which is certainly a position that one could take, but I hope that if someone takes it, they would take it in a more sort of straightforward way. because right now the issues that we're dealing with are real. I don't think anyone on this school committee is blaming any individual or any local governmental entity. We've been saying now for a couple of years that this is attributable to just a terribly flawed state formula. But we're the ones that have to deal with it, and our administrators are the ones that have to deal with it. And it is part of our responsibility to continue to beat that drum, regardless of how irritating it might be to whoever's listening. And so I think that, that's a message that the school committee needs to continue to send. I think we need to send it in every forum that we can. I think we need to advocate zealously, not because we think it's just what's best for the schools, but because we think it's what's best for the community as a whole. And that's I think, been a pretty consistent message throughout, and I think it's one that we'll have to continue to deliver. To that end, at our August 17th meeting, I have invited representation from the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization out of Cambridge that studies at length, in great detail, trends in state funding. And I happen to have had occasion to see a part of the presentation, and I thought it might be useful for our purposes to get a sense as to how our circumstances are sort of reflective of problems that school districts across the Commonwealth are dealing with. And so you can set your VCR, not you guys all need to be here, but others can set their VCR for August 17th for that presentation. So I would just like to entertain a motion to endorse the memo that for logistical purposes has already been sent from the school committee to the city council.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Any questions or comments related to that? No?
I'm not gonna say anything.
Okay. All right. I think that's around 8 o'clock. It might be a little bit later. They've got a very busy agenda. I certainly don't want to impose. So if anyone is able to, if anyone's around, that'll be happening on Thursday night. All right. So we have an executive session, which I forgot to do last night. So pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 21A, 2 and 3, the school committee will convene an executive session for purposes of conducting strategy sessions and preparations for negotiations with non-union personnel and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee. The school committee will not reconvene in open session. And before we do that, I just would say that we are, as of now, scheduled to meet on August 3rd. That meeting has been postponed to August 10th. So the next regularly scheduled school committee meeting will be August 10th, not August 3rd. So the motion.
Moved.
Mr. Withers?
Yes.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Scales?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mrs. Zito?
Yes.
Ms. Singer?
Yes.
Okay, we will take a 2-minute recess and then convene an executive session.